Stephen II, King of Hungary and Croatia, ruled from 1116 until 1131. His father, King Coloman, had him crowned as a child, thus denying the crown to his uncle Álmos. In the first year of his reign, Venice occupied Dalmatia and Stephen never restored his rule in that province. His reign was characterized by frequent wars with neighbouring countries. Early years, Stephen and his twin brother, Ladislaus, were sons of King Coloman of Hungary by his queen, Felicia of Sicily. According to the Illuminated Chronicle, they were born in the year of our Lord 1101. Stephen was named after the first king of Hungary, who had been canonized in 1083, implying that he was his father's heir from birth. A document written in Zadar in approximately 1105 AD makes mention of Stephen, our most renowned king, along with Coloman, proving that the latter had his 4-year-old son crowned king. By the time of Stephen's coronation, Coloman had demonstrated his intention to secure the succession for his son. Coloman's ambitious brother, Álmos, who had already rebelled against the king in 1098, opposed this plan and left Hungary. He first sought the assistance of Henry V, Holy Roman Emperor, followed by an appeal to Duke Boleslaw III of Poland. When all of his efforts ended in failure, Álmos submitted to Coloman and returned to Hungary, although he made several abortive attempts to dethrone Coloman in the following decade. In order to bring an end to the menace these plots presented to Stephen's succession, Coloman had Álmos and Álmos's little son, Bar copyright La, blinded. When he fell gravely ill in early 1116, Coloman also had his brother imprisoned. The Illuminated Chronicle narrates that the dying king instructed his son and his great men to invade Rus in order to take vengeance for Coloman's failure in the 1099 siege of Przemyśl, Poland. Coloman died on February 3, 1116. Reign = wars and internal conflicts = Stephen was crowned king and Tsar copyright Xvha copyright Rva within 30 days of his father's death. His peaceful succession showed the effectiveness of the measures Coloman had implemented to prevent Álmos from usurping the throne. Upon his councillor unregistered trademark's advice, Stephen initiated a meeting with Vladislaus I, Duke of Bohemia, in order to improve the country's relations, which had deteriorated in the previous decade. The two monarchs met on the river Olava, which marked the border of their realms. However, the lack of mutual confidence hindered the opening of negotiations, leading to armed conflicts which evolved into a battle on May 13. On the battlefield, the Bohemian army inflicted a serious defeat on Stephen's troops. The contemporaneous Kuzmas of Prague blamed the young king's advisors for the fiasco, but later medieval Hungarian chronicles all completed under kings descending from Stephen's opponent, Álmos wrote that the king acted without consulting his advisors. For he was of an impetuous nature. The Hungarian people are prodigious in energy, mighty in strength, and very powerful in military arms sufficient to fight with a king of lands anywhere. After the death of their king, Coloman, their princes sent to Duke Vladislav to renew and confirm with the new king, named Stephen, their ancient peace and friendship. Vladislav came to the river Olava, which separates the realms of Hungary and Moravia. Immediately, the Hungarian people, innumerable as the sands or drops of rain, covered the whole surface of the land in the field of Luisko, like locusts. But, as scripture says, woe to the land whose king is a child. Their princes, through their inborn pride in themselves, strayed from the duke's peaceful words and sent replies more to stir up strife than to bring the kiss of peace. Doge Ordolafo Faliero, who had conquered an island in the Gulf of Kvarna during the last year of Coloman's reign, returned to Dalmatia at the head of the Venetian fleets in May 1116. On July 15, he vanquished the Hungarian troops which had arrived to relieve Zadar. Thereafter all towns including Biograd na Morop, Angstrom Ibenic, Split, and Troja surrendered to Venice, terminating Stephen II's suzerainty along the coastline of the Adriatic Sea. However, in either 1117 or 1118, the Hungarian troops were able to defeat the Venetians, during which Ordolafo Faliero himself died at a battle near Zadar, enabling Biograd na Morop, Split, and Troja to rejoin the sovereignty of the Hungarian monarch. However, the new Doge, Domenico Michele, invaded and reconquered all Dalmatia. A 5-year truce, which was concluded in 1117 or 1118, confirmed the status quo, the seizure of Dalmatia by Venice. Stephen's troops launched a plundering raid into Austria in 1118, provoking a counterattack by Leopold III, Margrave of Austria, later that same year. Bohun unregistered trademark Ivage II, Duke of Bohemia, supported Leopold and pillaged the northwestern regions of the Kingdom of Hungary. Despite this, when Vladislaus I dethroned his brother Bohun unregistered trademark Ivage in 1120, Bohun unregistered trademark Ivage fled to Hungary and settled at Stephen's court. Stephen married a daughter of Robert I of Capua, in the early 1120s. Historian Paul Stevenson wrote that Stephen's marriage alliance with the Normans of southern Italy must have been partly directed against the Venetians. The Norman princes of Capua had been the Pope's staunch supporters during the investiture controversy, suggesting that his marriage also continued his father's pro-papal foreign policy. Stephen's cousin and the daughter of his uncle Álmos, Adelaide, whose husband Sobáslav had been expelled from Moravia, arrived in Hungary in early 1123. According to Cusmers of Prague, Stephen kindly received her, acknowledging her as his relative, which implies that his relations with his uncle were cordial around that time. In the same year, the young king launched a military expedition against the Principality of Volhynia in order to assist its expelled prince, Yaroslav Sviatopolcic, regain his throne. Even though Sviatopolcic was assassinated at the beginning of the siege of his former seat, Volodymyr Volynskiy, Stephen decided to continue the war. However, according to the Illuminated Chronicle, his commanders threatened to dethrone him if he continued the aggression, forcing Stephen to lift the siege and return to Hungary. Cosma, of the line of Patsan, stood up before the king and said, "Lord, what is this thing which you are doing? If with the death of a multitude of your soldiers you take the castle, whom will you appoint as its lord? If you choose one among your nobles, he will not remain here. Or do you wish to abandon your kingdom and yourself have the dukedom? We barons will not storm the castle. If you wish to storm it alone. We are returning to Hungary and we will choose for ourselves a king." Then by order of the nobles the heralds announced throughout the camp that the Hungarians should return as speedily as possible to Hungary. When the king thus saw himself justly deprived of the help of his people, he returned to Hungary. Taking advantage of the absence of the Venetian fleet from the Adriatic Sea because of a naval expedition in the Levant, Stephen invaded Dalmatia in the first half of 1124. His charter confirming the liberation of Split and Troja in July 1124 is evidence that the central regions of Dalmatia returned to his rule. However, upon the return of the Venetian armada the Dalmatian towns once again surrendered, one after another. According to the Historia Ducum Beneticorum, only the citizens of Biograd na Mura dared resist the Doge and his army. But their city was razed to its foundations. According to the Illuminated Chronicle, the blind Álmos, fearing death at the hands of King Stephen, fled to the Byzantine Empire. Many of his partisans followed him, and Emperor John II Comnenus settled them in a town in Macedonia. The Byzantine historian John Kanamos confirmed that the emperor looked upon Álmos favorably and received him with kindness. He added that Stephen sent his envoys to the emperor and demanded that Álmos be expelled from the Byzantine Empire, but his request was rejected. The sources do not specify the date which Álmos fled, but it likely occurred circa 1125. Historian Ferenc Bak wrote that Álmos was forced to flee from Hungary because he had taken advantage of Stephen's failures in Volhynia and Dalmatia, and conspired against Stephen. Stephen met the new Duke of Bohemia, Sobáslav I, whose wife was Adelaide I in October 1126. The meeting of the two monarchs brought an end to the hostilities between their two countries. Around the same year, Stephen also concluded an agreement with Archbishop Conrad I of Salzburg. Last year's. According to the Byzantine chronicler Nicetas Choniates, the citizens of the Byzantine town Branievo attacked and plundered the Hungarians who had come to the Byzantine Empire to trade, perpetrating the worst crimes against them. In retaliation, Stephen decided to wage war against the Byzantine Empire. The Illuminated Chronicle relates that the childless Stephen so ordered the succession to the throne that after his death the son of his sister Sophia, by name Saul, should reign. The chronicle does not specify the date of this event, but Ferencváros says that Stephen most probably declared Saul as his heir during the first half of 1127, before storming the Byzantine Empire. Stephen broke into the empire in the summer. His troops sacked Belgrade, Branievo and Nia, and plundered the regions around Serdica and Philippopolis, before returning to Hungary. In response, Emperor John II marched against Hungary in 1128, where he defeated the royal troops in a battle at Harum, and captured Vrangachorion, the richest land in Hungary. Stephen was unable to participate in the fighting because he happened to be sickly in body and was recuperating someplace in the midst of his land, according to John Álmos. The Illuminated Chronicle said that his illness was so serious that all expected his death. The chronicle added that traitors went so far as to elect two kings, the Counts Bos and Ivan. Upon regaining his health, Stephen had Ivan executed and expelled Bos from his kingdom. John Álmos wrote of a second campaign by Stephen against the Byzantine Empire. The Hungarian troops, supported by Czech reinforcements under the command of Duke Václav of Olomouc, took Branievo by storm and destroyed its fortress. Emperor John II Comnenus was forced to retreat and sue for peace. Historian Ferencváros writes that the resulting peace treaty was signed in October 1129. Going to Braničevo for a second time, Emperor John made haste to rebuild it. Since some time elapsed in the task, the army, suffering from winter weather and lack of necessities, was in severe distress. When he learned this, the Hungarians' king decided to cross the Danube as quickly as possible and attack them unexpectedly. In the Hungarians' land, however, there was a woman, a Latin by birth, outstanding in wealth and other distinction. Sending to the emperor, she revealed what was being planned. Since he was unable to engage them with an equivalent force, because as stated his army had already been overcome by disease and lack of necessities, he fortified the city where possible and withdrew. For many years, Stephen believed that his cousin, Bar Copyright Law, had died after being blinded on the orders of Stephen's father. Having learned, around 1129, that Bar Copyright Law was alive, the king rejoiced with great joy. According to the Illuminated Chronicle, he even granted Bar Copyright Law the town of Tolna and arranged Bar Copyright Law's marriage with Helena of Rascia. The Illuminated Chronicle recounts that Stephen showed blatant favoritism towards the Comans, identified as Pechenegs or Cumans by historians, who had arrived in Hungary in the 1120s. In his last years, he even tolerated the crimes they committed against his subjects, causing a revolt. Before his death, Stephen laid aside his royal state and took the habit of a monk. He died of dysentery in the spring of 1131. No source recorded the exact date of his death, but most of his biographers wrote that he died on March 1. He was buried in the Várad Cathedral. Family. According to the Illuminated Chronicle, Stephen had no wish to marry a lawful wife but took to himself concubines and harlots. However, his advisers, grieving that the kingdom was in a sorry state and the king without a heir, persuaded him to marry. They chose a daughter of the late Robert I of Capua as their monarch's wife, although her name was not recorded. Stephen died childless. The following family tree presents Stephen's ancestors and some of his relatives who are mentioned in the article. Whether Gar Copyright Tsar's first or second wife was his children's mother is uncertain. References. Sources. Primary sources Secondary sources